Thank you, everyone. And it was a wonderful presentation. And one thing is very exciting, wherein a lot of audit reports. That's a nightmare for us right now to provide. We are offering managed services to our clients. So there, Karthik is really tired of giving all the audit reports that are required by the regulators. So I think that tool that you mentioned should be, much more beneficial. And anyways, we'll discuss and how we can implement that. So I think to start things, so Kaushal and I, are working together for almost a year now, and we are collaborating very closely and sharing lot of ideas, how we can improve a lot of things. And one thing that I must appreciate that Kaushal and team really came up with a wonderful solution in a very short span of time. So for that, it was really wonderful. So my first question to you is, how you're leveraging the AWS cloud and the services offered by AWS for building your platform, right from ID money for the US stocks to the Indian stocks.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Saurabh, for such a nice intro. Thanks, everyone here, and thanks for having me here. Thanks, Rupeeseed. Like I said, we ID Money started in 2019, where we had a 3.5 years journey. Right from day one, we only did everything on AWS, right? We just completely did everything on cloud. Imagine the first few days, how things would have been so much messier. And the background of people who started doing ID Money was all from people who did the travel tech before, right? So Ashish, who is our CEO now, earlier founded GoIBO, in case people didn't know here. And then after a successful merger into BigMatter, we ventured into doing this ID Money. So it was completely like we had in that Satish session, right? So it's completely compliance driven and everything, right? So the first thing to start with, right? Right from day one, we always thought of doing Dockerized way, right? So and AWS obviously has multiple ways of how we can deploy that on ECS or EKS, then of course there was Redshift, which we could use, and then to start with, we actually started as a very nice portfolio management, as the most important thing that we wanted to do. Later we did so many other things. And then there was humongous amounts of data that was coming in, right? So the amount of data, for example, we were actually looking at how much was being tracked or spent by the user, tracking all of that, right? So that involved huge amounts of data. And then we had DynamoDB for rescue there, right? We used DynamoDB to generate insights, and then also use it in real time in multiple cases. And subsequently, as we grew, we also built transaction systems, US stocks, and of course the journey of in stocks started last year, like Saurabh was mentioning. April we started doing this, and then October we launched our first external customer. So 6 or 7 months. It was such a roller coaster ride, I would say. And of course now it was. We all knew that it was just the start, it was not the end. So we were able to do so agile, primarily because we were on cloud. So we didn't need to worry about managing our workloads. We didn't need to worry about managing or creating our databases. We didn't need to worry about how much of resources should I be giving my compute and the database, data stores and all of that. So primarily because we are on cloud, just a lot of things were made easier, and then of course launching things were all faster. So we could actually concentrate on actual implementation stuff, which was the most important thing to do at that point of time, right? So now if you actually go into in stocks, right, so there are multiple layers out there. So you will see that you would definitely use Elastic Cache, right? So without cache we can't do anything. And then of course there is a lot of systems, because we also have a centralized onboarding system. We also have this multiple other silos, which are, say, for example, US stocks, Indian stocks, and many other things, right? So all these systems have to interact with each other, right? So how we interact is through SQS, right? And then we have a message queue-based system. Of course, we interact with Rupeeseed and then others through Kafka. And of course, there are many other layers inside the system, like for example, we use OpenSearch, which is the Elasticsearch, which is where we use Elasticsearch, and then of course that is for all the catalog, static content, and all of that we have to show. And again, we of course, a lot of the compliance stuff that he actually asked, my IT team every day in and day out, sits on AWS, generates the reports, gets that vetted through our external auditors, and then send it to exchanges. And then, typically, till we ventured, at least because I was heading the engineering for this, right, till we ventured into doing this, I didn't know that we could actually do a lot of the stuff ready-made, including the on-premise connection through AWS Direct Connect, which was much more stabler thing than trying to do a VPC-based thing, right? So we are completely on cloud that way. Launched the entire product, and then we are where we are at IND Money and IND Stocks because we leveraged cloud at the right time.
So I think you mentioned a couple of services of AWS. So like Docker microservices that you are using. So I assume you must be, using some tools for auto scaling, both to save cost and also to manage the search. So we know in our domain you can expect any kind of traffic with any kind of things.
You mentioned quite a few of services, a lot of services.
This is how do you scale, and what kind of compute do you reserve is something that is very interesting, right? So how much of compute do you actually use? How much of compute do you really need to allocate is something that no one can actually say, right? So the biggest advantage here is with this auto scaling groups, with this idea of having them scale basis the many kind of parameters, including CPU, memory, throughput, and whatnot, right? You can actually essentially do anything basis, any of these parameters, auto scale. That really helps us. For example, I'll just give you one classic case, what happens, right? So, which is what we was also discussing just about before this. So, we started targeting our customers, basically to just send some notifications in terms of how market is behaving and all of that. So at 9:30, 9:45, when we say market is open, suddenly I see about 3x traffic, right? And then we are resilient. We thankfully, touch wood, we didn't go down even on the first day of such notifications firing up recently, right? That is because of having some of this proper configuration set up. If we had not had the configuration set up properly, we would have definitely gone down because the amount of scale that you can expect is something that you can not imagine. And then of course Dockerizing has helped us immensely because we run on very thin containers. We don't need to do vertical scaling. We obviously do horizontal scaling. We understand that small containers, 4 core, 8 GB is the maximum that we use, or even lesser than that, right? So we don't. So horizontal scaling is much more easier. So I don't need to. I just can add anything. But of course we do. And then how do we save cost with this, right? So I think there is a different session where we talk about cost. But maybe one liner that I can add is for example, there is a spot that you can use to be able to save a lot of cost, and also, but of course it has its own downsides where things go suddenly. But of course you need to be able to be reliant in terms of handling all of that. So that's how we scale, and that's how we are able to adapt to even the sudden surge in traffics that come.
He has raised some very, very interesting points here, right? So if we speak about capital markets here, or the workload of capital markets, the volatility of market, be it sometimes there will be event-based thing, and there will be a huge spike in your workload, right? And at times you will have a stable workload, right? For example, the example that he gave, during the start of the market and perhaps even the stop of the market, you will see a 5x surge of users coming in and looking at your application and trading, putting up trades and all of that. Now, that is one of the most important differentiating factor when you move to cloud and AWS, right? Because especially for capital market workloads here, because either you do just if you are on premise or on colo, you will basically provision it for peak, right? So ultimately you are wasting the resources there or you are paying more cost, right? That is what, and once you move on to the cloud, because of the economy of scale of cloud and AWS itself, you can scale it very well, right? And you have architectures, and once you go for that modern architectures, you can scale it well and you have more cost optimized architecture. And that's a amazing point that
and maybe perhaps I'll just maybe add one more point there, right? For example, you look at broadcast, right? From what time to what time you need a broadcast. And why do you need to run servers after that, right? And if you can handle things in your application in a way that even if the broadcast is not there, it's an empty packet or nil packet or whatever, if you can just handle that simple thing, you can shut down your containers the remaining time. So for example, we don't run the other half of the day, right? We only run for 12 hours in a day. And that is primarily because we also have this auto turn on, turn off, and all of that, which is configured through Lambda. Right? AWS Lambda allows you to write some functions inside, and launch anything that you want. Even for example, if I have to actually send if I have to even trigger anything, right, at any point of time, I can actually trigger basis that, right? So yeah, a lot of use cases out there which we could actually solve, in terms of saving cost, primarily because we could use Lambda and then of course auto scaling group and stuff like that.
Absolutely true. So 2 years back, if you asked me, probably I was with the opinion that, in capital market, kya hoga, you know what kind of loads are there, you always know, you will configure the servers and accordingly. But, with the recent, first experience wherein a recent client of ours who was, every week it was doubling in its volumes, clients and all that, and he was, at entity, typical data center, wherein it was a nightmare for us to, get the more number of servers, and the requirement keeps on adding. So it was really a difficult task. So recently we worked with them and we are moving them to, AWS. So I think, what I could clearly recall from the interaction that we had during the implementation, you always wanted to reduce the errors in terms of both functional and technical errors. So you wanted to bring or build all checks and balances right at the front end so that the user, right at the time of placement of order or doing any transaction, he knows it well and he is not, making any mistakes. So I think you must be the Elasticsearch or any other tools that you used, and if you can, explain a bit about that.
Oh yeah. See, what happens in this industry is people don't know what to do, right? If I tell them stop loss, or me when I was starting to do the capital markets a few years back, I didn't know what stop loss was, right? So I obviously made mistakes, right? So what actually helps user to run away from our industry, which is a very beautiful thing actually. The investing is a beautiful thing, right? That's why we are all what we are. The economy only grows when we are doing that, right? So. We should educate people, right? So how we can educate people is by giving them more nudges, right? By giving them more information that is required, right? For example, if I have to understand what is happening in Reliance today, or any company, right? Or what is happening in TCS, what happens when Infosys results are out or whatever, right? So that is whether to do X or Y, which is buy or sell or hold or whatever, no one has any information about that. And then what we thought of doing was, aggregate that, take the data from multiple sources, right? There are multiple data providers. We know we always get the static data from multiple people, and then started ingesting that data. Of course, we do the data in the hard way in RDS, right? But then RDS doesn't scale, right? I want things to be coming very fast for the user on the app. And these days, the new investors, I feel I'm a little old now, but all the 20, 25-year-old people now, they all need speed, right? If you are making them wait for 1 second on the app for loading that, people will just turn off, right? So how can we do that, right? How can we essentially do that is, multiple ways, right? So apps can directly talk to, for example, things like FCM, for example, Firebase, right, where you have a remote config, and then you can directly take the data coming in and then directly immediately show to the user, have a subscription already made, right? And also, how can you retrieve the data faster? Maybe Elasticsearch, like you were mentioning, right? Elasticsearch, where you actually index the data properly, you actually find the right data. Say that, okay, these are all the peers for Reliance Industries or whatever, right? So how, and then for example, one very classical use case is people do intraday trading, and what we, I think a few people actually try doing is, they look at the top gainers and short it, or top losers and buy it, and then try to, people who want to play, right? And that's what I also tried doing, when I had to learn the system, right? So this top gainers, top losers, things keep changing dynamically, right? It keeps changing every minute, right? How do you power the right content to the user at the time? So when I open the app, the top gainers that I show has to be actually relevant at that time. It should not be something stale. So Elastic, the open search, the AWS offering of that, of Elasticsearch was something that came to our rescue, where we started ingesting the data directly into Elastic with some nice, data models and then stuff. With good, and limited data. You can't essentially have loads and loads of data, because if you're getting the data over the wire, your application is going to suffer, right? So it has to be minimal amount of data, and then what amount of data is required, just that amount of data to be shown to the user. And of course, when you come to this, when you come to this when I was talking about speed, not just even Elastic, when you start getting more amount of data, you tend to become slower. So you always have Elastic Cache. You can actually use the cache, but then of course there's a joke that people say, cache invalidation is an NP hard problem, right? So because you start caching at multiple levels, you are actually, you have to build reliable systems to be able to purge the cache as well, right? So you need to also build on that side. So just because I know that I have an Elastic Cache, or I can use an Elastic Cache or an Elasticsearch or whatever, doesn't essentially mean that your application is going to be performant. You need to also build the cache invalidation strategies. And for cache invalidation strategies also, for example, Redis provides something called as Redis pops up, which is Elastic Cache that is there, that is something that you can actually use. Many people don't know in the industry. So you can actually use the same thing to be able to purge the cache and then power the right content to the user at the same time. And in terms of showing the nudges to the user on stop loss, and then for example, validations and all of that, what I usually am a firm believer of making less network calls. You know that in my experience, right? In your experience, I'm a firm believer of making less network calls, which means that I want to, in an intelligent way, send the data all to the client, and then let the client do all the validations that are required. And as much as possible, we are trying to do it the same ways to reduce the latencies over the app.
No, I think he has just described a complete journey here, right? When you start, as he said, right, within 8 months, just IND stocks could go live with the customer. Now, exactly that also shows how you are differentiating, right? Now, the thing is that if you are again on the colo or on-prem, your experimentation capability is limited here as well. As he said, right now, if you see, as you move towards cloud, you have the set of services he mentioned. It takes away a lot of your heavy lifting. Now you are focusing on what matters for your business rather than creating a team, just maintaining the infrastructure for it, right? Now that is again a cost for your business altogether. Now if you see, even if we take the exact use case where we have created a complete ecosystem here, where Rupeeseed is basically providing the infrastructure as a managed solution to communicate as a complete platform. And what IMD Money or IMD Stocks is doing is actually focusing on that cohort of customer and giving that customer experience. Now, what you are ideally doing is differentiating with customer experience that matters, and you have your team completely on focus doing that itself. Now, what will that do is you will innovate faster and you will go faster and get more and more customers there and more and be successful in that piece, right? And the way he mentioned a few things here, right? It helps you to start at a particular phase and you completely keep on evolving. So it's not just that I'm already done. I am reinventing myself continuously with newer.
And then sometimes you re-engineer also.
Yeah. So that's what you will eventually keep on doing, because it's easy to fail, right? You should fail faster so that you can think and optimize yourself to move to the next level. And that's what the whole benefit that he pointed out very rightly matters.
Right. So I think re-engineering is the word that I'll pick up from the last thing, and knowing Kaushal, we have our own broadcast component which can serve to the end client. But Kaushal was with the view that he wants to build one of his own as well, taking the data from us and the broadcast field from us. So anything on that, Kaushal, that you want to highlight, because the broadcast is another monster that we need to deal with, and the app, the feeds, at any point of time you cannot you cannot show a delayed data to the end user.
Yeah, very interesting thing. The broadcast gives you sleepless nights, right? And thankfully, when you do the engineering properly, your sleepless nights will end with to be very few, and then after that it will all be sorted. So what we tried doing was initially, there were two approaches, right? For example, I can directly connect with the exchange. Maybe the approaches, one is I can directly connect with the exchange. Two, I can directly connect through Rupeeseed, who is interfacing the exchange. I don't need to learn about, for example, of course I would love to, but I don't need to, for the sake of speed, learn about TCP and then all those sockets and all of that, right? So, and then the third thing is to implement, basically serve it, take a layer on top of that and to be able to serve. I'll tell you why we have done the third one. So the third one essentially means that my clients, underlying, for example, if I have to at some point of time, have my clients directly talk to my broadcast application, and then for some reason there is a change in the broadcast application, there is a change in the contract, there is a change in anything, right? There's a change in how the service, how the WebSocket request is taken, and then the response is sent or whatever, right? So then essentially the clients will need to make a change, and then client releases are always very expensive, right? So client releases are very expensive in the sense that I can't do it on the fly. I'll have to do I'll have to do an app release, and app release goes through a lot of cycles, takes people so much of time to adapt and all of that, right? So that is the problem that I wanted to solve, where I just wanted to decouple the user from what is happening behind, right? So the immediate solution was to do something, and then obviously, like I said, for the speed at which we delivered, we could not have picked up how this TCP/IP works and all of that, where you have done PhDs for many years, right? So what we did was tried looking at some open source technology, and then there were many options, but then for us, what we wanted, we picked up NATS, right? NATS is an open source technology where you can essentially have a distributed, resilient store which essentially pushes or the data from a producer standpoint, and from the consumer standpoint, he subscribes, and then I can subscribe to any number of subjects, is what they call, any number of, for example, in our case, stocks that I want to have receive the broadcast on, right? So the interesting thing here was how do we set it up, right? And what layer do we set it up, and how do we reduce the latencies? Right. The first thing is first, I have a Rupeeseed application which is hosted on our cloud, and that listens to the broadcast from the exchange. So there is one hop out there, and then from there I have to have my own application which will receive the data and then basically process it, because I receive it in bytes, right? 145 to 148 is so and so. I was like, what is this? I had sleepless nights, that's why I said, right? So out of 150 bytes, if I have to have 10 or 15 different things byte by byte, I really had tough time to, understand that and do it, right? So we need to have a layer which essentially understands that and parses that in an understandable way for my clients, right? So I need to write that anyway. And then from there, I should ensure that I'm not being too latent in comparison to anyone. Obviously everyone has access to everything. So if I'm being latent, people can open a Kite app, or people can open a Go or Paytm or anything, and then essentially show that they are faster, and then you're kind of slower, your ticks are slower, right? So you can't fool around with people now. So, and then of course we don't want to as well. It is good that people have more technology in their hands. So try to pick something, and then how even cloud helped there was I didn't have to literally do anything. I just had to take 2 or 3 ECS instances, which are, again, while creating the instances, I said I wanted Ubuntu instances, and then I got Ubuntu instances. Then I know how to install NAT server there. I just had to run 4 or 5 commands on each of the servers. And then the configuration file, it's all there, good documentation. I just had to write the documentation, I read the documentation, and then just set up the configuration file. Then boom, everything started working, right? So how life is made easier with this, and also see, one can argue that there is a bit of latency that adds up with multiple layers. Certainly yes. Bit of few nanoseconds certainly comes into the picture, but then the amount of resilience that it brings to us, and then the amount of speed at which we start serving is amazing. And then to start with, also on the application side, right? How this setup helps is there are 2 ways for the client to also connect. Whether you talk about mobile clients or even web, right? They can directly talk to the WebSocket, or that is a very complex implementation if you understand that, right? On the mobile clients, to be able to have a WebSocket implementation and subscription and all of that, you want a bit of abstraction on top of that. You don't want to do too many experimentations when you are a small company, budding company, and growing company, where you want to give the best experience to the customer. So it kind of abstracted a lot of stuff on that. And then, of course, there are multiple other alternatives as well. One could use Firebase as well, like I was telling earlier, right? Receive the ticks, push to Firebase. Firebase, anyone subscribed to Firebase obviously starts getting it. So yeah, a lot of engineering and re-engineering had to be done to be able to power the broadcast the way we are doing today. So yeah.
I think Kaushal has given a deep engineering lightning talk here. But amazing. A few of the learnings from what Kaushal just mentioned is the flexible nature of it, right? How you can have different architecture. One is the way he mentioned the message-oriented architecture or pub-sub architecture, and how you can evolve with all the options, be it open source or be it the native solutions, how you can use that and come up with the right solution which is purpose-built for your use case, right? That's the core benefit, and which again sends you that you have that elasticity, agility, as well as the culture of innovation within your organization to keep on re-engineering or reinventing your workload to best serve it, right? By the way, as you mentioned, you will have sleepless night, you have removed your, but I'm sure in financial service workload, you will have another use case to solve to have that sleepless night. But yeah,
Yeah, I mean that is always there. So I always find sleepless nights in how we can make customers' life easier, how we can massify, this investing.
but cloud can take away some of your heavy lifting.
Absolutely.
Yeah, great. So I think still I've got 10 minutes. So uh, the probably the last or the second last question from my side is, so we implemented multi-OMS platform at IIT Pune. Like Sandeep was mentioning that, if one component of one OMS platform, if it goes down, the other component will take care of it. And so I'll take 5 minutes here, and then probably, because I need to set the context in terms of what exactly multi-OMS is. So basically, any of the CTCL application, if you see, the OMS and the RMS component always remain in an active and passive mode, wherein only one set of services of the OMS that connects to the exchange can run. There we engineered a bit. So last 4 or 5 years we were working on that, and Paytm was the first company that went live with multi-OMS some 4 years back, 3.5 4 years back. So with this multi-OMS coming into picture, we got the redundancy that was required to give near 100% uptime, but there was an inherent challenge. So with multi-OMS coming in picture, the end client or any of the third-party middleware. So end client, when I say, it's basically the dealers or the admin, and the middleware. So if anybody wants to have their own middleware, they will not connect to any of the OMS directly, which was the case with a single OMS setup. So we had a challenge wherein the real-time order confirmation that was sent to the risk management terminals or the dealer terminals cannot be sent, which was a kind of turn-off for traditional brokers who had a good chunk of business coming through the dealer-based network. So we had, that challenge in front of us, and then recently we developed a solution for that using Kafka, wherein you can have 10 OMS running at 10 different locations, all active, so that your redundancy is maintained, and all these 10 OMS are writing to one Kafka.
It dates back to 4 or 5 years. I'll just do a rewind. And then those were the days when we were hosting Kafka on our own servers, and suddenly something happens, and then unlike fintech, unlike capital markets, the travel industry was never 6 hours or 8 hours in a day. It was 24 hours. So anything can happen anytime, and then you'll have to react to anything anytime. So we used to have this outages where your service stops running because of something, or because of memory issues, or because of whatever scaling issues, whatever at some point of time, right? So that is those are all. I mean, we have of course solved all of that on premise itself at that point of time. But then here, how we could quickly go live again in less than 15. It was not 1 month, by the way. Less than 15 days, because IND Money, we are very strict about timing. So, how we could go there was, of course, we launched it using MSK, right? And then basically when a client was making an order, right? How do I receive the updates on top of the order? Was what was the problem that both of us, you and I, were trying to solve that, and in real time, and in ensuring that none of the packets are getting lost because of any downtimes and whatever, right? So we were using MSK there. That is again a managed Kafka, service by AWS, but I'm sure must be there on many other clouds as well. But the advantage, I'll tell you one subtle advantage that I had because of cloud, right? So I had a very strange issue where the Kafka broker was getting disconnected after 5 minutes, right? Strangely. Right? This happened for about 3 days, 2 days, 3 days, and for our speed also we were not able to solve that in 2 days, right? And everything sounded all right from the code, and so there is this way we could take the help of subject matter experts in AWS, so we could speak, and then at least they were able to guide us through some things. But of course, the issues was something else. But then the advantage here of using the cloud was that there was someone who was able to look at my configuration, look at replay the logs, what were happening earlier, understand what happened, and then what actually caused the issue where the broker went down, and then help us. So all of that are possible because we are on cloud where everything is accessible, honestly by anyone who has the access, right? So again, please don't take me wrong that anyone can access my cloud logs, but I think the idea is understood here that someone who has access can essentially go and check and then help you out, right? So that help. Otherwise, you will have to dump all the logs into a file, send it over an email or a Slack message, wait for the person to respond, and all of that. Things are now made easy with that.
So I think MSK in itself, I would say if it is not a managed Kafka in itself is very, very difficult to scale and I would say monitor. Because when the problem comes to debug, that is a nightmare in itself. But I think a very good point when you differentiate that too, because you have gone through both the journeys, right? Self-hosting it and doing it yourself, as well as using a managed version, which basically is just use it, right, and scale it well. You mentioned one point is taking away when you want debugging, it's easier. How do you see even the monitoring and scaling factor of it? How does it help? How does it differentiate from the on-demand or the self-hosted version?
Yeah, I mean, see, technically it's all ultimately underlying, it's all the same thing, right? But what actually happens here is that you can say that at the time of creation of the Kafka cluster itself, you can say that I need so many nodes in my Kafka cluster. And then I can essentially have some bit of auto scaling out there, adding of provisioning, dynamic provisioning of nodes. But one bad thing is of course I can't downscale the infrastructure there. Especially there are some flip sides and some downsides and some upsides of everything, right? So but you essentially have very good user interface where even someone who doesn't understand a lot of Kafka, what Kafka is and all of that, can essentially create a Kafka cluster with just some configurations, parameters, enter how many nodes do you want and all of that, and a nice UI, and then you just can launch the cluster, right? So that way it makes life easier for people to launch. We could launch a Kafka cluster in 2 minutes. Yeah, so that's how you do it things faster, right? So. And one thing that I wanted to highlight also was, apart from this Kafka, one beautiful thing is because of this is something called as event bridge, right? Where again, in my experience, right, we use Airflow for triggering the timed, stuff, right? So it's a self-hosted Airflow, right? So every time when I was doing, so it was taking a few seconds to be able to launch something because it has to launch maybe a Lambda to be able to do something and essentially do the job that I wanted. It was taking some seconds. So, and then in our financial markets, for example, hypothetically, if I have to do this top gainers, right, every 1 minute if I have to, update it, right, by the time it launches itself, 30 seconds are over, right? So, so Event Bridge was something that really helped us to be able to do it faster. And also, one nice thing is, what if it had failed? How many times do you want to retry? And what is the cap, right? After what amount of time do you want to shut this down? For example, if one rogue process is taking more than a minute and killing all your databases, data stores for some reason, then you can always kill it at some point of time, right? So that kind of benefit is also there. So whether you talk about MSK or Event Bridge or anything, you essentially have that made easy configurations. You can actually go to the AWS and then start doing it yourself.
Absolutely. So I think Kafka is, I started loving it, and probably Anisha here will know that, we had some hard time at PS Securities pushing the trades to all the dealers in their bank network, which was, I don't know, I still am not able to understand how complex is that was. So we are bringing some kind of use case of Kafka there so that, the reconciliation and the updates can happen there. So that is one that we are also, I think it's almost through. Very soon it will get pushed to the single OMS traditional brokers who are more into dealing and dealer-based and the admin-based systems. So yeah, I think that's it from my side, and if anybody from the audience is having any questions, we are happy to take it. Yeah, I think we are good. We will connect one-on-one. So anything that you want to add, or we can?
No, thanks for having me again. Thanks for inviting me here and having me, and hope there were at least something meaningful discussions that we had. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Saurabh, for organizing this and having us here from AWS. Yeah, and I think on just a closing note, I would say, as Sandeep rightly pointed out, right, eventually we are also seeing digital disruption. I would use that word, where again going into the capital markets world and the brokers world, where everyone is eventually going to come to cloud to move faster and differentiate themselves for their end users and the workload, and that will eventually help them to be more profitable as well as move more innovative in their business.
No, and in fact, the regulators are mandating everyone to essentially move to cloud, right? So, I mean, not just for agility in the business, but also for the amount of managed security that the managed clouds bring in. I think we all should definitely adopt, at least. I would not say that there can be use cases which are specific to some businesses. So I would not say that everyone has to only look at cloud, but there are a lot of problems today that cloud can make it easier. Whatever cloud, right, can make it easier for us than doing it traditionally. And I'd like to end on that note. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.